The pile of correspondence on the mahogany desk grew like a small mountain. Letters, invitations, requests, all awaiting the attentive eyes of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. The silent Vatican room maintained its solemnity, while the afternoon light filtered through the ancient windows. Among official envelopes and letterheads, a simple piece of paper folded several times caught his attention. It had no stamp, only a name written in childish, trembling handwriting, for the cardinal who helps people. The contrast of that improvised envelope with the others was almost a visual prayer. His hands, tired from blessing, paused over that piece of paper, as if they could feel the weight of the unread words. Something in that simplicity detained him. The world outside continued its frantic course, while that moment suspended time within the sacred walls. The envelope bore marks of dirt and moisture. The edges, worn from the unlikely journey to get there, told a story even before being opened. How it had reached his desk was a mystery, or perhaps a small bureaucratic miracle amid the rigidity of Vatican protocols. The cardinal took a deep breath, feeling an inexplicable tightness in his chest. The sun's rays now illuminated only that letter, as if the rest of the world had darkened. His fingers carefully opened the folded paper, revealing a message written in pencil, with simple words that would soon blur the boundaries between continents. Rommel was only 9 years old, with eyes that carried the weight of decades. In the refugee camp on the Syrian border, he observed the sky as if seeking answers in the clouds that passed by indifferently. His small, thin body moved between improvised tents, carrying water when available, hope when he could manage. The bombs had taken his parents 3 months earlier. The same explosions that left invisible scars on his soul left a visible one on his face, an irregular line that cut across his left cheek to his chin. Adults looked at him with pity, but Rommel had learned to disappear, becoming almost a ghost among the living. In the camp's improvised school, a volunteer showed them images of important men who helped people like them. Among serious and distant faces, a captivating smile caught his attention. Cardinal Tagle visiting children in another camp, embracing them as if they were his own. Rommel fixed his gaze on that image for hours, fascinated by the genuineness that emanated from that stranger in red. At night, while others slept, Rommel found a piece of paper and an almost spent pencil. He didn't know exactly where to send it, but the volunteer had said that the man in red worked in a place called the Vatican. That was enough for him. Lying on a thin blanket, using the weak light of an almost battery-less flashlight, he began to write. The words came simply, like drops after a drought. He didn't ask for toys or food. Rommel wrote about what he saw, about the sky that seemed the same everywhere, about how good it would be if people could see through each other's eyes. He wrote as if conversing with a distant friend, wondering if anyone would really hear his silence. Cardinal Tagle read the letter once, then again, and yet again. Each word seemed to penetrate deeper into his being. When I look at the sky, I imagine that you might be seeing the same clouds, just from the other side. This makes it seem like we're not so far apart. The cardinal's hands trembled slightly, holding that fragile piece of humanity. The letter brought no material requests. Rommel wrote about the small daily miracles he found even in desolation, the flower that grew among the rubble, the silent embrace of a woman who had also lost everything, the bird that landed on his hand as if it trusted him. Details that many would consider insignificant, but for the boy were proof that there was still something beyond pain. The last sentence of the letter hung in the air like a prayer. If God cannot be everywhere at once, is that why people like you exist? The question, in its childish simplicity, carried the depth of centuries of theology. The cardinal felt his eyes moisten, a solitary tear marking the path down his face until it fell onto the paper. That night, Cardinal Tagle couldn't sleep. Rommel's letter lay on his bedside table, illuminated only by the faint light of a small lamp. The words seemed to take on a life of their own, whispering in the silence of the room. The innocent question echoed in his mind like a call he could not ignore. As dawn approached, the cardinal sat down and began to write. It wasn't a formal response, nor rehearsed words of comfort. It was a sincere conversation, soul to soul, where titles and positions dissolved in the ink that ran across the paper. He wrote about his own doubts, about the small joys he also found, about how Rommel's words had touched something deep in his heart. The cardinal's response reached the refugee camp 2 weeks later. The coordinator called Rommel, confused by that official correspondence addressed to a child. The boy received the envelope with trembling hands, incredulous that his letter had actually reached its destination, even more that it deserved a response. Rommel moved away to a quiet corner where the tents met the perimeter fence. He sat on the hard ground and carefully opened the envelope, preserving every detail like a treasure. The letter was long, handwritten, in an elegant but accessible calligraphy. It began with, "Dear Rommel, my friend and teacher." The cardinal's words didn't treat Rommel as a child worthy of pity, but as an equal, a human being whose eyes saw truths that many adults had forgotten. He spoke about how the boy's letter had been read during a meeting with other religious leaders, and how everyone had fallen silent, touched by the purity of those observations. As he read, silent tears marked Rommel's face, mixing with the dust of the camp. A volunteer noticed the scene from afar and approached, concerned. Seeing the letter and the sender, her eyes widened. She asked permission to read it, and Rommel nodded, still absorbed in the words that were now his. The news spread through the camp like wind in the desert. The child who barely spoke had received a personal letter from Cardinal Tagle. Other refugees approached, wanting to touch the paper, as if it could transmit some of the hope that now illuminated Rommel's eyes. For the first time in months, the boy smiled genuinely, his scar moving like a small wave on the ocean of his face. At the Vatican, Cardinal Tagle felt a growing restlessness in the days that followed. Rommel's words reverberated in his mind during meetings, masses, and official conversations. "I wish people could lend their eyes to each other, just for one day. Maybe then there would be no more bombs." The simplicity of that desire contained a wisdom that transcended doctrines. During an interview for a Catholic television network, when asked about the challenges of the Church in the modern world, the Cardinal surprised everyone by mentioning Rommel's letter. Without identifying the boy or his exact location, he shared excerpts he had memorized. His voice, normally firm and controlled, broke as he recited the childish words about the sky and clouds that connected distant people. The interview aired in dozens of countries. On social media, Rommel's words, through the Cardinal's voice, began to be shared in different languages. Secular journalists picked up the story, intrigued by that unlikely connection between a high prelate of the Church and an anonymous child in a refugee camp. A documentary producer contacted the Vatican, requesting permission to create a short film based on this exchange of letters. The Cardinal hesitated, concerned about Rommel's exposure. He consulted child protection specialists and humanitarian organizations. The decision wasn't simple. There were risks, but also the possibility that the story would inspire concrete actions to help thousands of children in similar situations. After days of reflection and prayer, the Cardinal accepted the project with strict conditions for protecting Rommel's identity and dignity. What had begun as a simple letter was now transforming into a growing movement. The networks of compassion wove invisibly throughout the world, connecting strangers who recognized in the Syrian boys' words the humanity they shared. The refugee camp where Rommel lived began to receive unprecedented attention. Humanitarian organizations, inspired by the story now circulating globally, redirected resources and volunteers. It wasn't just about a boy and a cardinal. It was about recognizing humanity amid chaos, about hearing voices that the world had silenced. Rommel, protected by the coordination team, continued his routine. The sudden fame frightened him, but regular correspondence with Cardinal Tagle anchored him in reality. His new letters spoke about the changes in the camp, about the English classes he now attended, about the small community garden where they had planted tomatoes and aromatic herbs. Celebrities and world leaders began to visit the camp, not for opportunistic photos, but genuinely moved by the story they had come to know. A famous plastic surgeon offered to treat Rommel's scar, but the boy refused with surprising wisdom. "It reminds me who I am and where I come from," he wrote to the cardinal. "Some marks need to remain visible so we don't forget." In Rome, Cardinal Tagle used his influence to mobilize resources and political will. In meetings with world leaders, he would take copies of Rommel's letters from his pocket, always with authorization and omitting identifying details, and read excerpts that invariably silenced conference rooms. The boy's wisdom disarmed even the most cynical politicians. The documentary, released 6 months after the first letter, became a global phenomenon. Filmed with respect and sensitivity, it showed the reality of refugee camps through the eyes of children, interweaving their stories with the correspondence between Rommel and the cardinal. Screenings in cinemas and churches were followed by spontaneous donations and the formation of support groups for families displaced by war. The following spring, Cardinal Tagle embarked on an unannounced journey. Only a small group knew his real destination, the refugee camp where Rommel lived. Without entourages or cameras, he arrived as a common visitor, wearing simple clothes, without the vestments that would announce his position. The camp coordination had prepared Rommel for the meeting, but nothing could really prepare him for that moment. When the cardinal entered the small room of the improvised school, the boy froze. There he was, in flesh and blood, not the man in red from the photographs, but a gentleman with gentle eyes and a familiar smile, as if they were old friends. There were no speeches or ceremonies. The cardinal simply opened his arms, and Rommel ran into his embrace, like a leaf returning to the tree. The silence of that encounter said more than volumes of theology. Adults present in the room couldn't contain their tears witnessing that connection that transcended languages, cultures, and ages. For 3 days, Cardinal Tagle lived in the camp, sleeping in the same tents, eating the same food, listening to the stories of each person who approached, not as a dignitary on an official visit, but as someone who had come to learn. At night, he sat with Rommel and other children, observing the stars and talking about their dreams and fears. On the last day, a team of journalists discovered his presence and approached the perimeter. Instead of avoiding the cameras, the cardinal invited them in, but with one condition: that they show the complete reality, not just his visit. The images that would circulate around the world in the following hours would not be of official handshakes, but of a religious leader sitting on the dusty ground, listening attentively while children drew their lost homes and future dreams. 1 year after the first letter, Rommel and 20 other children from the camp were invited to visit the Vatican. The trip, organized with extreme care and all necessary authorizations, was not a media exhibition, but an educational and healing opportunity. For many of those children, it was the first time they had entered an airplane, seen the sea, or stepped on soil not marked by war. In St. Peter's Square, Rommel looked at the vastness of the colonnade as if he could embrace the world. His scar, now part of his identity, moved with his smile as he explained to his friends the architectural details he had anxiously studied before the trip. He was no longer the invisible boy from the camp. He now carried a serene presence, an inner light that others naturally sought. During a special audience, the Pope greeted the children and listened attentively as each shared a piece of their story. When it was Rommel's turn, the silence in the room was palpable. His words, translated into 5 languages simultaneously, spoke not of victimization, but of resilient hope. "I learned that letters can build bridges where bombs create abysses," he said, looking directly at Cardinal Tagle, who watched with paternal pride. That visit marked the beginning of an international program of letter exchange between children from conflict zones and students from schools around the world. The Words That Touch the World project, inspired by the original correspondence between Rommel and the Cardinal, grew organically, connecting children from different realities through the transformative power of sincere writing. Rommel would eventually gain asylum in a European country, along with a group of orphans from the camp. He would study diligently, maintaining regular correspondence with Cardinal Tagle for years to come. His dream was not to become famous or rich, but to build bridges, literal and metaphorical, so that other children could cross abysses as he had done. And as he grew, he carried with him the certainty that a simple letter, written in the darkness of a refugee camp, had lit a light that would continue to shine long after the paper disintegrated with time. If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.